I walked into Dad's 70th birthday party, carrying a bottle of his favorite whiskey, the same brand he'd been drinking since before I was born, the kind that cost me 3 weeks of grocery money, but I figured some things were worth it. The living room was packed with relatives I hadn't seen in months, all laughing and sharing stories about the man who raised us. That's when my brother Daniel looked me straight in the eye and said the words that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What are you even doing here? You're not family anymore. The room went silent. 23 people stopped mid-conversation and turned to stare at me. My Aunt Sarah's fork froze halfway to her mouth. My cousin Mike's beer can stayed suspended in the air. Even the music seemed to pause. I stood there holding that expensive bottle, feeling every pair of eyes burning into me, waiting for someone to tell Daniel he was wrong, waiting for Dad to step in, waiting for anyone to defend me. Nobody did. I should probably start from the beginning, because the story of how I ended up being disowned by my own brother at my father's birthday party didn't happen overnight. My name is Jessica, and for 32 years, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought it meant showing up, supporting each other, and sticking together no matter what. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. Growing up, Daniel and I weren't particularly close, but we weren't enemies either. He was 2 years older, and had always been the golden child. The one who could do no wrong in Mom and Dad's eyes. When he got caught spray painting the neighbor's fence at 15, it was just boys being boys. When he crashed Dad's truck into a mailbox at 17, well, accidents happen. When he dropped out of college after 2 semesters to pursue his dream of becoming a professional poker player, they called it following his passion. Meanwhile, I was the responsible one, the one who helped Mom with groceries every week, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and anniversaries, the one who worked 3 jobs to put myself through nursing school because asking for help wasn't an option when Daniel needed money for his latest get-rich-quick scheme. Not that I'm bitter about it. I learned early that being reliable meant being invisible, and being invisible meant being taken for granted. After Mom died 4 years ago, things shifted in ways I didn't expect. Dad, who had always been the strong, silent type, started leaning on me more. Not emotionally, mind you, but practically. I became the one who drove him to doctor's appointments when his vision started failing. I was the one who organized his medications in those little weekly pill containers. I was the one who made sure his house stayed clean and his refrigerator stayed stocked. Daniel, meanwhile, had discovered cryptocurrency and was convinced he was going to be a millionaire by Christmas. Every Christmas, for the past 3 years. He'd moved back into Dad's house after his apartment lease ran out, claiming it was temporary while he got his business off the ground. That was 18 months ago. The thing about being the reliable one is that people start expecting reliability from you like it's a natural law. The sun rises, the earth rotates, and Jessica handles whatever needs handling. It becomes so automatic that they forget it's a choice you're making every single day. They forget that you're a person with your own life, your own problems, your own dreams, that keep getting pushed aside because someone else needs something. Take last winter, for example. Dad's furnace broke down in the middle of a cold snap. Daniel was nowhere to be found, probably at some poker game, or crypto conference, or whatever he was calling work that week. So who do you think got the call at 6 in the morning? Who do you think spent her day off driving across town to let the repair guy in, and wait around for 4 hours while he fixed it? Who do you think paid the $400 repair bill because Dad's Social Security check wasn't due for another week? If you guessed me, congratulations. You're starting to understand how this family worked. The pattern was always the same. Crisis would strike, Daniel would vanish, and I would swoop in to save the day. Then once everything was fixed and everyone was comfortable again, life would go back to normal until the next emergency. Nobody ever said thank you. Nobody ever acknowledged that I had dropped everything, spent my own money, used my own time, sacrificed my own plans. It was just expected. But here's the thing about expectations. They have a way of growing heavier over time, like snow accumulating on a roof. You don't notice it at first, but eventually, something's going to give way under all that weight. The beginning of the end started 6 months before Dad's birthday party, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I was at work, pulling a double shift in the ICU because we were short-staffed again, when my phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. Not unusual. What was unusual was the tone. Emergency, need to talk. Now I couldn't leave work, obviously. People's lives were literally in my hands. So I texted back that I'd call him during my break in 2 hours. His response was 3 angry face emojis, and a message that said, "Typical, always too busy for family." When I finally called him back, the emergency turned out to be that Dad had been talking about updating his will. Daniel had overheard a phone conversation between Dad and his lawyer, something about making sure everything was fair and up to date. Daniel was convinced this meant Dad was planning to leave me everything because I was the one who took care of him. "It's not fair, Jess," he said, and I could hear the whine in his voice that had been there since he was 5 years old and didn't want to share his toys. "I'm his son, I live with him. I'm the one who keeps him company." I wanted to laugh at that last part. Keeping him company. Daniel spent most of his time locked in the basement with his computers, emerging only for meals and to ask for money. But I didn't laugh because I could hear something else in his voice. Something that sounded like desperation. "I'm sure Dad's going to be fair to both of us," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "He loves us both. You don't understand," Daniel insisted. "He's been different since Mom died, more sentimental. And you're the one who's always here, always helping. He thinks you're the better kid." There was something almost vulnerable in the way he said it, and for a moment I felt sorry for him. It couldn't be easy living in the shadow of someone else's competence, always being the one who needed help, instead of giving it. But then he said something that should have been a red flag. "You need to talk to him. Tell him you don't want everything. Tell him to split it 50-50 like it should be." "Daniel, I can't tell Dad how to write his will. That's his decision. So you're just going to let him give you everything? You're going to screw over your own brother?" "I'm not screwing anyone over. I don't even know what Dad's planning, and neither do you." You overheard half a conversation. But Daniel was already worked up, already convinced that I was scheming against him. The conversation went downhill from there, ending with him hanging up on me, after calling me selfish and manipulative. I went back to work with a knot in my stomach, telling myself it would blow over like his tantrums always did. It didn't blow over. Over the next few weeks, Daniel's behavior toward me grew increasingly cold. When I came by to check on Dad, Daniel would make snide comments about how I was trying too hard, how I was being fake, how I was obviously sucking up for the inheritance. When I brought Dad groceries, Daniel would mutter something about me keeping track of every penny I spent, so I could get paid back later. The worst part was that Dad seemed oblivious to all of it. Or maybe he was just avoiding conflict, which had always been his way of dealing with family drama. He'd change the subject whenever things got tense, or suddenly remember something he needed to do in another room. I understood it, in a way. He'd spent 45 years married to our mother, who had been the family mediator, the one who smoothed over every disagreement and kept everyone talking to each other. Without her, he was lost. But his avoidance meant that Daniel's resentment had room to grow and fester. And grow it did. The breaking point came on a random Tuesday evening in March. I had stopped by after work to help Dad organize his tax documents, something I did every year, because numbers made him nervous, and Daniel couldn't be trusted with anything involving the IRS. We were sitting at the kitchen table, sorting through receipts and forms, when Daniel came upstairs from his basement lair. He took one look at us with papers spread everywhere, and just lost it. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," he shouted, gesturing wildly at the table. "Look at this. She's going through all your financial stuff, Dad. She knows exactly what you have, exactly what everything's worth. How is that not manipulation?" Dad looked up, confused and startled. "Daniel, she's helping me with my taxes. She does this every year." "Right, and why do you think that is?" "It's not because she's being nice. It's because she wants to make sure she's in your will. She wants to know what she's getting." I felt my face getting hot. "That's not true, and you know it." "Is it? Then why are you the only one who helps him with money stuff? Why are you the only one who knows about his finances? Why don't you ever let anyone else help?" "Because you've never offered to help. You've never shown any interest in helping with anything. Because you never give me the chance." You swoop in and take care of everything, so you can be the perfect daughter, and then you act like you're so put upon and nobody appreciates you. Dad was looking back and forth between us, like he was watching a tennis match, his expression getting more distressed by the second. I could see that this was upsetting him, so I tried to lower my voice and de-escalate. Daniel, this isn't the time or place for this conversation. Dad doesn't need to hear us fighting. No, you know what, maybe he does need to hear this. Maybe he needs to know that his precious perfect daughter isn't as selfless as she pretends to be. And then Daniel said something that felt like a physical blow. He doesn't care about you, Dad. She cares about your money. Everything she does is calculated. Every favor, every visit, every time she buys you groceries or drives you to the doctor, she's keeping score. She's building up credit so when you die, she gets everything and I get nothing. The silence that followed was suffocating. Dad looked at me with something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Not quite suspicion, but uncertainty. Like maybe, for just a moment, he was wondering if Daniel might be right. That look broke something inside me. I stood up slowly, gathering my purse and jacket. My hands were shaking, but I kept my voice steady. I think I should go. Dad didn't try to stop me, he didn't defend me, he just sat there looking confused and sad, while his son accused his daughter of being a gold digger, and his daughter walked out of his house, with tears in her eyes. I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes, crying and waiting for someone to come after me. Waiting for Dad to open the front door, and tell me he knew Daniel was wrong, that he knew I loved him, and wasn't just using him for money. But the door stayed closed. That was the moment I realized that 32 years of being the good daughter, the reliable one, the one who sacrificed for everyone else, might not have been worth as much as I thought. That all my efforts to be perfect, and selfless and indispensable, had been interpreted as manipulation and calculation. The irony was that I had never once thought about Dad's will or inheritance. Not seriously, anyway. I assumed that whatever he had, would probably be split between Daniel and me, and I was fine with that. I didn't need his money. I had my own career, my own savings, my own life. I helped him because I loved him, not because I expected to be rewarded for it. But Daniel's accusation planted a seed of doubt in my mind. Had I been keeping score, without realizing it? When I paid for Dad's groceries, did some part of me expect to be remembered for that kindness? When I spent my Saturdays cleaning his house, or my evenings organizing his medications, was I unconsciously building up equity in our relationship? The more I thought about it, the more confused I became about my own motivations. Maybe Daniel was right. Maybe I was manipulative and calculating, and I just hadn't admitted it to myself. Maybe being helpful was just another form of control. For the next 3 months, I pulled back. I still called Dad every few days to check on him, but I stopped going over as often. I stopped volunteering to help with errands or appointments. I waited for him to ask for help, instead of anticipating his needs, and jumping in to fix everything. The results were immediate and telling. Dad started sounding more tired on our phone calls. His house, which I could usually gauge by the background noise, seemed quieter and messier. When I did stop by, I noticed that his mail was piling up unopened, his refrigerator was nearly empty, and he looked like he'd lost weight. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed completely oblivious to Dad's declining situation. Or maybe he just didn't care. He was busier than ever with his cryptocurrency ventures, constantly on his phone or computer, talking about market fluctuations and blockchain technology and digital wallets. When I asked him how Dad was doing, he'd always say fine, great, no problems, everything under control. But everything was clearly not under control. The wake-up call came on a Friday morning, when I got a call from Dad's neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. She was worried because she hadn't seen Dad outside in several days, and when she went to check on him, he seemed disoriented and confused. She was thinking about calling an ambulance, but she wanted to check with family first. I drove over immediately, and found Dad sitting in his kitchen in yesterday's clothes, staring at a bowl of cereal that had gone soggy. There were dishes in the sink that looked like they'd been there for days. The counter was covered with unopened mail and prescription bottles, and I could smell something rotten coming from the refrigerator. "Dad," I said gently, "how are you feeling?" He looked up at me with eyes that took a moment to focus. "Jessica, what are you doing here?" Mrs. Rodriguez called me. She was worried about you. I'm fine, he said automatically, but his voice was weak and his hand trembled when he reached for his coffee mug. I spent the next hour checking on him, cleaning up the kitchen, and going through his medications. He'd been taking his blood pressure pills irregularly, and I was pretty sure he hadn't been eating proper meals. When I asked him about it, he just kept saying he was fine, everything was fine, Daniel was taking good care of him. But Daniel was nowhere to be found. His car wasn't in the driveway, and when I called his phone, it went straight to voicemail. I left 3 messages over the next 2 hours. He never called back. I ended up staying with Dad for the rest of the day, making sure he ate a real meal and took his medications properly. I helped him shower and put on clean clothes. I did a load of laundry and went grocery shopping and organized his pill containers for the next week. All the things I'd been doing for months before our fight. All the things Daniel had accused me of doing for selfish reasons. When Daniel finally showed up that evening, he seemed annoyed that I was there. "What's going on?" he asked. "Why are you here?" "Dad needed help," I said. "Where have you been?" "I had a meeting about a new investment opportunity."
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
It's important. More important than making sure Dad is okay. Daniel's face hardened. "Don't start with me, Jess. I live here. I know what's going on. Dad is fine. He's not fine. Look around. Really look. When's the last time he had a decent meal? When's the last time he took his medications on schedule? When's the last time you actually talked to him instead of hiding in the basement with your computers? I don't need you lecturing me about taking care of Dad. You don't live here. You don't see him every day." "You're right, I don't live here, but I can see what you can't or won't see. He's struggling, Daniel. He needs more help than he's getting. So what are you saying? That I'm not doing a good enough job? That I'm a bad son?" "I'm saying that maybe we need to work together instead of fighting each other. Maybe we need to put Dad's needs first." But Daniel was already shaking his head, already building his walls back up. "This is just another way for you to make yourself look good and make me look bad. You swoop in for one day and suddenly you're the hero and I'm the villain." I was so tired of fighting, so tired of being misunderstood, so tired of having my motives questioned every time I tried to help. "I don't want to be the hero, Daniel. I just want Dad to be okay." "Right, sure you do." That conversation, like all our conversations those days, ended badly, but it clarified something for me. Daniel wasn't going to change. He wasn't going to step up and take responsibility. He was going to keep living in Dad's house, using Dad's resources and telling himself that his presence was enough. And Dad, who hated conflict and wanted everyone to get along, was going to keep pretending everything was fine even when it wasn't. So I made a decision. I would go back to helping Dad, but I would do it quietly and without fanfare. I would stop expecting Daniel to appreciate it or even acknowledge it. I would stop hoping that Dad would defend me or validate my efforts. I would help because it needed to be done, not because I expected anything in return. It worked for a while. I found ways to check on Dad and assist him without making a big production of it. I would stop by when Daniel was out, or I would text Dad to see if he needed anything from the store when I was already going shopping. I set up automatic deliveries for his groceries and medications. I arranged for a cleaning service to come twice a month, telling Dad it was a gift and not to worry about the cost. Dad seemed relieved to have the help, though he never said so directly. His health stabilized. His house stayed clean. His refrigerator stayed stocked. But our relationship had changed in ways I couldn't quite define. There was a distance there now, a carefulness that hadn't existed before Daniel's accusations. It was like he was afraid to accept too much help from me, afraid that Daniel might be right about my ulterior motives. The sad thing was that I started to feel guilty about everything I did for him. Every time I bought him groceries, I wondered if he thought I was keeping track of the cost. Every time I helped him with paperwork or appointments, I wondered if he thought I was trying to control his affairs. The spontaneous loving gestures that had once felt natural now felt calculated, even to me. That's the insidious thing about false accusations. Even when you know they're false, they get into your head and make you question yourself. They make you second-guess every kindness, every generous impulse. They poison the well of your own good intentions. Spring turned into summer, and Daniel's resentment seemed to be growing instead of fading. He made cutting remarks whenever I was around. He questioned my motives openly in front of Dad. He started telling other family members that I was manipulating Dad for the inheritance, that I was taking advantage of an old man, that someone needed to keep an eye on me. I heard about it from my cousin Rebecca, who called me one evening sounding uncomfortable and confused. "Jessica, I don't know how to say this, but Daniel called me last week. He's saying some pretty serious things about you and your dad." My stomach dropped. "What kind of things?" "He says you're trying to get Dad to leave you everything in his will. He says you're keeping track of every dollar you spend on Dad, so you can get paid back from the estate. He says you're isolating Dad from the rest of the family so you can control him." Rebecca's voice was gentle but concerned. I told him that didn't sound like you at all, but he was really upset. He sounded like he really believes it. "What's going on over there?" I tried to explain the situation without making Daniel sound completely unreasonable, but it was hard. "How do you tell someone that your brother has convinced himself that your love for your father is actually an elaborate financial scheme? How do you defend yourself against accusations that are so far from your reality that you don't even know where to start?" "I think Daniel is scared," I said finally. "Dad's getting older, and Daniel's living situation isn't very stable, and he's worried about the future. He's looking for someone to blame for his problems, and I'm an easy target because I'm the one who's been helping Dad the most." Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "Do you think Dad's really planning to change his will?" "I have no idea. He's never talked to me about it. Honestly, I don't want to know. I don't want Daniel to be able to say I influenced Dad's decisions. That's probably smart. But Jessica, you need to be careful." Daniel sounded really worked up when he called me. I've never heard him like that before. Her warning turned out to be prophetic, though not in the way either of us expected. The crisis came in late August, just a few weeks before Dad's birthday party. I had taken Dad to his annual physical, something I'd been doing for years because Daniel was never available, and Dad got anxious driving in traffic. The appointment went well. Dad's blood pressure was under control. His cholesterol levels were good, and the doctor was pleased with his overall health for a man his age. As we were leaving the medical center, Dad seemed more talkative than usual. Maybe it was relief at getting a good report, or maybe it was just the mood he was in, but he started reminiscing about Mom and how proud she would be that we were all taking care of each other. "Your mother always worried about what would happen to Daniel and me if something happened to her," he said as I drove him home. "She knew you'd be fine. You've always been strong and independent. But she worried about Daniel. He's never been good with practical things." I didn't know what to say to that, so I just murmured something agreeable and kept driving. But Dad wasn't finished. "I've been thinking a lot about the future lately. About what happens when I'm gone. I want to make sure everything is fair, but I also want to make sure everyone is taken care of according to their needs." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. This was exactly the kind of conversation Daniel had warned me not to have with Dad. "Dad, you don't need to worry about that stuff right now. You're healthy, you're doing great." "I know, but a man my age has to be realistic. And Jessica, I want you to know how much I appreciate everything you do for me. I know it's not easy, and I know you have your own life to live. Your mother would be so proud of the woman you've become." His words made my throat tight with emotion. It was the first time since Daniel's accusations that Dad had directly acknowledged my help, and it meant more to me than I could say. But it also scared me because I knew Daniel would never believe that this conversation had happened spontaneously. He would assume I had prompted it somehow. Manipulated Dad into thinking about inheritance and gratitude. "I love you, Dad," I said. "I help you because I want to, not because I expect anything in return. I know that, sweetheart. I've always known that." When we got back to the house, Daniel's car was in the driveway. I walked Dad inside, and was planning to leave quickly to avoid another confrontation, but Daniel intercepted us in the hallway. "How did the appointment go?" he asked, but he was looking at me suspiciously rather than at Dad with concern. "Everything's fine," Dad said. "Dr. Peterson says I'm in good shape for an old man." "That's great," Daniel said. Then to me, Thanks for taking him. I had a really important call I couldn't miss. There was something in his tone that made me look at him more carefully. He seemed agitated, like he'd been pacing or arguing with someone. His eyes were bright with an energy that reminded me of the way he used to look when he was a kid and had done something wrong but hadn't been caught yet. No problem, I said. I'm glad I could help. I'll bet you are, he said under his breath, but loud enough for both Dad and me to hear. Dad frowned. Daniel, what's that supposed to mean? Nothing, Dad. I'm just saying Jessica's always happy to help. She's very helpful. The way he said the word helpful made it sound like an insult. I could feel the familiar knot forming in my stomach, the tension that always preceded our fights. But I was determined not to take the bait this time. I should get going, I said. I'll call you tomorrow, Dad. But as I turned to leave, Daniel stepped into my path. Actually, Jessica, since you're here, there's something I want to discuss with both of you. Dad and I exchanged glances. There was something about Daniel's demeanor that set off alarm bells for both of us. What is it, son? Dad asked. Daniel took a deep breath, like he was preparing for something big. I've been doing some research into elder abuse, and I think we need to have a serious conversation about what's been happening in this house. The words hit me like a slap. What are you talking about? I'm talking about financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. I'm talking about people who use their position of trust to manipulate elderly family members. I'm talking about what you've been doing to Dad. Dad stepped forward, his voice rising. Daniel, that's enough. Jessica has never done anything but help me. Has she, Dad? Or has she made herself indispensable so she can control your decisions? Think about it. She handles your money, she drives you to appointments, she talks to your doctors, she knows everything about your finances. She's isolated you from the rest of the family and made herself the only person you depend on. I was so shocked by the accusation that I couldn't speak. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, these were serious criminal charges he was throwing around, not just family drama. That's not true. I finally managed. Dad, you know that's not true. But Daniel wasn't finished. I've been documenting everything, Dad. Every time she's paid for your groceries and kept the receipts. Every time she's been involved in your financial business. Every time she's isolated you from other family members. I have a whole file of evidence. Evidence of what? I demanded. Evidence that I care about my father. Evidence that I help him when he needs help. Evidence that you're systematically manipulating a vulnerable adult for financial gain. Evidence that you're already treating his money like it's yours. Evidence that you're positioning yourself to inherit everything by making him dependent on you. The room was spinning. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Daniel wasn't just accusing me of being selfish or calculating. He was accusing me of a crime. He was suggesting that every act of love and service I'd performed for my father had actually been a form of abuse. Daniel, Dad said, and his voice was shaking with anger. Stop this right now. Jessica has never taken a penny from me. She's never asked me for anything. Everything she does out of love. That's what you think, because that's what she wants you to think. But I've been watching, Dad. I've been keeping track. She's been grooming you for years, making you dependent on her, isolating you from me and the rest of the family so she can control you. You're sick, I whispered. You're actually sick, am I? Then why are you the only one who handles his money? Why are you the only one he trusts with his important business? Why does he call you when he needs help instead of me? His son who lives in the same house. Because you're never here. Because you disappear whenever there's actual work to be done. Because you've never shown any interest in helping with anything. Or because you've made sure I can't help. Because you've convinced Dad that you're the only one who can be trusted. Because you've turned him against me so you can have him all to yourself. Dad was looking back and forth between us with an expression of horror and confusion. This wasn't the kind of family disagreement he was used to mediating. This was something darker and more serious. Both of you need to stop, he said. This is my house, and I won't have my children accusing each other of terrible things. But Daniel had gone too far to back down now. Dad, I think you need to talk to a lawyer. I think you need to make sure your will reflects your true wishes and not Jessica's manipulation. And I think you need to consider whether Jessica should continue to have access to your financial information. That was the moment I knew our relationship was beyond repair. Daniel wasn't just jealous or resentful anymore. He genuinely believed that I was a criminal who was abusing our father for money. There was no coming back from that kind of accusation. "I'm leaving," I said quietly. "Dad, I'm sorry you had to hear this. I'm sorry our family has come to this." "Jessica, wait," Dad called after me, but I was already walking toward the door. "Don't," Daniel called out. "Let her go. Maybe now you'll see what she's really like when she doesn't get her way." I drove home in a daze, Daniel's words echoing in my head. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, systematic manipulation, these weren't the insults of a jealous brother anymore. These were serious accusations that could ruin my reputation and my career. If Daniel really believed what he was saying, if he really had been documenting my interactions with Dad, then he might actually report me to authorities. The thought terrified me. I worked in healthcare. I had access to vulnerable patients every day. Even unfounded allegations of elder abuse could destroy my nursing license and end my career. And even if the accusations were eventually proven false, the damage to my relationships and my reputation might be permanent. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about every interaction I'd had with Dad over the past few years, analyzing it from Daniel's twisted perspective. When I bought Dad groceries, was I keeping track of what I spent? Well, yes, because I had a budget and needed to balance my checkbook. When I helped him with his finances, was I gaining access to information I could use to manipulate him? Well, I did know what his assets were and how much money he had. When I drove him to doctor's appointments, was I controlling his medical care? Well, I did talk to his doctors and help him understand his treatment options. Every innocent action could be reinterpreted as suspicious if someone was determined to see malice. Every kindness could be twisted into manipulation if the observer was looking for evidence of wrongdoing. But the worst part was that Dad had heard Daniel's accusations and hadn't immediately rejected them. He'd defended me, yes, but there had been a moment of uncertainty in his eyes. A moment when he'd wondered if maybe, possibly, his daughter really was too good to be true. 3 days later, Dad called me. "Jessica, I think we need to talk." My heart sank. About what Daniel said. "Yes, I don't believe him, but I think we need to clear the air. I think we need to make sure there are no misunderstandings between us." I agreed to meet him for lunch at a restaurant, neutral territory where Daniel couldn't interrupt us. Dad looked tired when I arrived. Older somehow, like the stress of the family conflict was wearing on him physically. "I want you to know that I don't believe what Daniel said about you," he began. "But I also want to understand why he believes it. Help me understand what's happening with you too." So I told him. I told him about Daniel's fears regarding the will, about his accusations of manipulation, about his resentment of the help I provided. I told him about my own confusion and guilt, about how Daniel's accusations had made me question my own motives. I told him about the impossible position I felt trapped in, where helping too much made me manipulative, and helping too little made me neglectful. Dad listened quietly, occasionally asking questions or asking me to clarify something. When I was finished, he was quiet for a long time. "Jessica," he said finally, "I want you to know something. Your mother and I always knew that you were the stronger one. We always knew that you would be okay no matter what happened, because you're capable and independent and you don't give up when things get hard. But we also worried that we were asking too much of you, that we were taking advantage of your good nature." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "When your mother was dying, she made me promise to take care of Daniel. She was worried that he wouldn't be able to take care of himself, that he'd make bad decisions and end up in trouble. She never asked me to promise to take care of you, because she knew you could take care of yourself. But maybe that was unfair to you. Maybe we should have protected you from having to be the responsible one all the time." I felt tears starting to form. "Dad, I never minded helping. I wanted to help. I know you did, but maybe Daniel minds that you don't need help. Maybe he's jealous that you're so competent and independent. Maybe he feels like he can't compete with that, so he's trying to tear you down instead. It was the most insightful thing I'd ever heard my father say about our family dynamics. For a man who usually avoided psychological analysis, he had cut right to the heart of the problem. "What do we do now?" I asked. Dad sighed heavily. "I don't know. I can't make Daniel see reason, and I can't make him stop believing what he wants to believe. But Jessica, I want you to know that your relationship with me doesn't depend on his approval. You're my daughter, and I love you, and nothing Daniel says can change that." His words were comforting, but they couldn't solve the fundamental problem. As long as Daniel lived in Dad's house and had his ear, there would be tension. As long as Daniel saw my help as a threat to his inheritance, every interaction would be viewed with suspicion. "Maybe I should step back," I said. "Maybe I should stop helping with appointments and finances and errands." 3 weeks after Daniel's sentencing, I was standing in my kitchen making potato salad, when Dad called to tell me he wanted to have a birthday party. "Nothing fancy," he said, his voice carrying more energy than I'd heard in months. "Just family and a few close friends. Maybe we can grill some burgers, play some card games. I want to celebrate being 70, and still being here to tell about it." I smiled as I chopped celery, happy to hear him sounding optimistic again. The past few months had been brutal for both of us, but Dad seemed to be finding his footing in this new reality, where Daniel was no longer part of our daily lives. "That sounds wonderful, Dad. What can I bring?" "Just yourself, sweetheart, and maybe that potato salad you make with the mustard dressing. You know how much I love that. Consider it done. Who else are you inviting?" Dad rattled off a list of our relatives and family friends. His brother Mike and his wife, my cousins Rebecca and Tom with their kids, Mrs. Rodriguez from next door, a few of Dad's poker buddies, and some people from his volunteer work at the community center. About 20 people total, a nice intimate gathering to mark this milestone birthday. What he didn't mention, and what I didn't think to ask about, was whether Daniel knew about the party. The restraining order prevented Daniel from contacting Dad directly, but it didn't stop him from hearing family news through other channels. Our extended family had been walking on eggshells since Daniel's arrest, trying to maintain relationships with both Dad and me, while not completely cutting ties with Daniel. It was an impossible situation that left everyone feeling uncomfortable and divided. Some relatives, like my cousin Rebecca, had been supportive and understanding about the whole situation. They recognized that Daniel's behavior had been criminal, and that Dad and I were the victims, not the perpetrators. But others, particularly some of the older generation, seemed to view the whole thing as a family dispute that had gotten blown out of proportion. They couldn't understand how a disagreement between siblings had ended with police involvement and court proceedings. My Aunt Carol, Dad's sister-in-law, had actually called me 2 weeks after Daniel's sentencing to suggest that maybe it was time to let bygones be bygones, and try to heal the family rift. When I explained that Daniel had systematically drugged and imprisoned our father, she dismissed it as a misunderstanding, and said that families should be able to work through their problems without involving lawyers and judges. That conversation had shown me how differently people can interpret the same set of facts when they don't want to accept an uncomfortable truth. To some of our relatives, Daniel was still the little boy they remembered from family gatherings, and his crimes were simply incompatible with their image of him. So they chose to minimize his actions, rather than update their understanding of who he had become. The morning of Dad's birthday party, I arrived at his house early to help with preparations. The weather was perfect for an outdoor celebration, warm but not too hot, with a gentle breeze that rustled the leaves on Dad's big oak tree. We set up tables in the backyard, strung lights between the trees, and arranged chairs in comfortable conversation clusters. Dad was in great spirits, humming while he marinated the meat for the grill, and checking the coolers full of beer and soft drinks. It struck me how different he looked compared to just a few months ago. The stress lines around his eyes had softened, his color was better, and he moved with more energy and purpose. Recovery from trauma takes time, but he was definitely healing. "You know," he said, as we set up the dessert table, "this is the first party I've looked forward to in years. For too long, family gatherings felt like walking through a minefield, never knowing when someone was going to explode or start a fight. It'll be nice to just enjoy people's company without all the drama." I knew what he meant. Daniel's presence at family events had always carried an undercurrent of tension. Would he drink too much and say something inappropriate? Would he get into an argument with someone about politics or money? Would he disappear in the middle of the party to take some important phone call about his latest business venture? There was always something. I'm glad you decided to do this, I told him. You deserve to celebrate surrounded by people who love you. The first guests started arriving around noon. Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah brought a beautiful chocolate cake and a bottle of Dad's favorite bourbon. Rebecca showed up with her 3 kids, who immediately ran off to explore Dad's backyard, like it was an adventure playground. Mrs. Rodriguez brought homemade tamales and insisted on helping in the kitchen, despite being a guest. As more people arrived, the house filled with laughter and conversation. Dad was in his element, moving from group to group, sharing stories and catching up with people he hadn't seen in months. Several people commented on how good he looked, how much better his spirits seemed. The unspoken comparison was to how he'd been during the final months of Daniel's manipulation, when he'd seemed confused and withdrawn. I was carrying a fresh pitcher of lemonade to the backyard table when I saw him. Daniel was standing at the side gate, not quite on the property, but clearly visible to anyone who looked in that direction. He was wearing a dark blue shirt that made him look pale and thin, and his hair was longer than I'd ever seen it, unkempt and hanging in his eyes. He was just standing there, watching the party like a ghost observing the living. My first instinct was panic. The restraining order meant he wasn't supposed to be within 100 yards of Dad's property. His presence here was a violation of his probation terms, something that could send him back to jail. But more immediately, I was terrified of what his appearance might do to Dad, who was finally starting to heal from months of trauma. I set the lemonade pitcher down carefully, trying not to draw attention to myself, and walked casually toward the gate. My plan was to intercept Daniel before anyone else noticed him, to convince him to leave before he caused more damage to our family. But I was too late. Rebecca's 8-year-old son Tommy had been playing hide-and-seek with his cousins, and had run to the far corner of the yard to find a good hiding spot. He was the first to see Daniel at the gate. "Uncle Daniel," he shouted with the unfiltered joy that only children possess. "You're here for Grandpa's party." The entire backyard went silent. 20 conversations stopped mid-sentence. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward the gate, where Daniel stood frozen, caught between fight and flight. Dad's face went through a series of expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, fear, anger, and something that might have been hope, all cycling through in the space of a few seconds. He set down his beer and took a step toward the gate, though whether to welcome Daniel or to order him to leave, I couldn't tell. "Daniel," Dad said quietly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent yard, "what are you doing here?" Daniel looked directly at Dad, ignoring the rest of us completely. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse, like he hadn't been using it much lately. "I wanted to wish you a happy birthday. I know I'm not supposed to be here, but I thought just this once." "You're right, you're not supposed to be here," I said, stepping forward. "The restraining order is still in effect. You need to leave before someone calls the police." Daniel's eyes flicked to me briefly, and I saw a flash of the old hostility. But when he looked back at Dad, his expression was almost pleading. "5 minutes," he said. "Just let me say happy birthday, and give you your gift, then I'll go." Dad was struggling. I could see the conflict written across his face. This was his son, the child he'd raised and loved for 34 years. But this was also the person who had drugged him, imprisoned him, and systematically abused him for months. How do you reconcile those two realities? Uncle Mike, who had been standing near the grill with a group of Dad's poker buddies, cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Maybe we should give you some privacy to handle this family matter." "No," Dad said quickly. "Everyone stay. This is my birthday party, and these are my invited guests. Daniel, if you have something to say, you can say it in front of everyone." It was a power move, and a smart one. By keeping witnesses present, Dad was protecting himself from potential manipulation, and ensuring that whatever happened next would be public and accountable. Daniel shifted nervously, clearly not having expected to address a crowd. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wrapped box, the kind jewelry comes in. "I brought you something," he said, holding the box out toward the gate. Something that belonged to Mom. I thought you should have it back. Dad didn't move to take the box. Instead, he crossed his arms and studied his son's face. What is it? Her wedding ring. I know you gave it to me after she died, but I think I was wrong to take it. I think it should stay with you. The mention of Mom's ring hit Dad like a physical blow. I remembered when he'd given it to Daniel, about a year after Mom's funeral. Dad had said he wanted Daniel to have something special of hers, something that might help him feel connected to her memory. At the time it had seemed like a generous, loving gesture. Now it felt like evidence of how Daniel had always been Dad's favorite, the one who got the family treasures, while I got the family responsibilities. But if Daniel was trying to return it now, what did that mean? Was it genuine remorse, or was it manipulation? Was he trying to buy his way back into Dad's good graces with a symbolic gesture, or had he finally developed a conscience about the things he'd taken that weren't rightfully his? Why now? Dad asked. Why are you bringing this back to me now? Daniel's composure cracked slightly. Because I don't deserve to have it. Because I know what I did was wrong, and I know I can't undo it, but I wanted you to know that I'm not completely lost. I wanted you to know that some part of me still remembers who I used to be before everything went to hell. There was real pain in his voice, real anguish. For a moment I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Daniel, Dad said gently. I appreciate the gesture, but a ring doesn't fix what happened between us. A gift doesn't erase months of abuse. I know that. I'm not trying to erase anything. I'm just trying to return something that was never really mine to begin with. The two men stared at each other across the gate, 34 years of father-son history, hanging between them like a heavy curtain. The rest of us might as well have been invisible, for all the attention they paid to anyone else. Finally, Dad walked over to the gate and took the small box from Daniel's hand. Their fingers touched briefly during the exchange, and I saw both of them flinch at the contact. Dad opened the box and looked down at Mom's simple gold wedding band, the ring she'd worn for 42 years of marriage. His eyes filled with tears. She loved you, you know, Dad said quietly. Even at the end, when she was so sick and in so much pain, she worried about you. She made me promise to take care of you, to make sure you didn't end up alone and lost. Daniel's face crumpled. I'm sorry, Dad. I'm so sorry for everything. I know I can't fix it, but I want you to know that I'm getting help. I'm seeing a therapist, and I'm trying to understand why I did those things to you. That's good, son. I hope the therapy helps you. Do you think you could ever forgive me? The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode.
Everyone in the backyard held their breath, waiting to see how Dad would respond. Dad was quiet for a long time, turning the ring box over in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful and measured. Daniel, I will always love you because you're my son. But forgiveness isn't something I can just decide to give you because you asked for it nicely. Forgiveness has to be earned through changed behavior over time. You can't drug someone, imprison them, lie to them and manipulate them for months, then expect forgiveness because you returned a piece of jewelry and said you were sorry. Daniel nodded like he'd been expecting that answer. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm trying to become someone who deserves your forgiveness someday. I hope you succeed. For your sake, not mine. It should have been a touching moment of reconciliation, or at least the beginning of one. Father and son acknowledging their love for each other, despite the terrible things that had happened between them. A first step toward healing. But then Daniel looked directly at me for the first time since he'd arrived. Jessica, he said, and there was something in his tone that made my blood run cold. What, Daniel? I need you to know that I don't blame you for what happened to me. I know you were just protecting Dad, and I know you thought you were doing the right thing. His words sounded reasonable, even generous, but there was something underneath them that felt wrong, like he was setting up for something else. I appreciate that, I said carefully, but I also need you to know that you destroyed our family. You chose to involve the police and the courts instead of trying to work things out within the family. You chose to make our private problems into public spectacles. You chose to send me to jail instead of getting me help. There it was. The accusation I'd been expecting, delivered in the guise of understanding and forgiveness. Daniel, I didn't choose any of those things. You chose them when you decided to drug Dad and hold him prisoner in his own house. You chose them when you decided to commit crimes instead of asking for help. Did I, or did I just make mistakes while trying to take care of Dad, and you blew everything out of proportion because you were so convinced I was the villain? The party guests were shifting uncomfortably, looking like they wanted to be anywhere but in the middle of this family confrontation. But Dad had asked them to stay, and now they were trapped listening to Daniel's revisionist history of recent events. Mistakes, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. You call systematically drugging our father mistakes. I call them the desperate actions of someone who was in over his head and didn't know how to ask for help. But instead of trying to understand why I did what I did, instead of trying to help me figure out how to do better, you went straight to the nuclear option. You called the police on your own brother, after you imprisoned our father, after you cut him off from medical care, after you convinced him that his own mind was betraying him, after you spent months accusing me of being manipulative and selfish, after you made Dad doubt everything I did, after you poisoned his mind against me with your constant implications that I was using him. We were shouting now, all pretense of civilized conversation abandoned. Dad stepped between us, his face flushed with anger and distress. Stop it. Both of you, stop it right now. This is my birthday party, and I won't have it turned into another battleground. But Daniel wasn't finished. He looked past Dad, straight at me, and said the words that would define our relationship forever. You know what the real tragedy is, Jessica? You spent so much time trying to prove you were the good daughter that you never stopped to ask whether Dad actually needed saving. You never considered that maybe I knew what I was doing. You never thought that maybe Dad was confused and disoriented for reasons that had nothing to do with me. He was confused and disoriented because you were drugging him. He was confused and disoriented because he's 70 years old and his mind isn't what it used to be. But you couldn't accept that your precious father might be declining, so you needed someone to blame. You needed a villain to make sense of why the strong, independent man who raised you was becoming vulnerable and dependent. His words hit me like a physical assault because there was just enough truth in them to hurt. I had been terrified of Dad's apparent cognitive decline. I had been desperate to find an explanation that didn't involve accepting his mortality. When Daniel's abuse provided a clear cause for Dad's confusion, it had been almost a relief to have something concrete to fight against. But that didn't make Daniel right. That didn't excuse what he'd done. Even if that were true, I said, it wouldn't justify what you did to him. It wouldn't make drugging him and isolating him acceptable. I wasn't drugging him. I was giving him his prescribed medications on a consistent schedule instead of letting him forget to take them or take them twice by accident. With extra sedatives mixed in, to help him sleep better. He was agitated and anxious all the time because he was scared and confused. He was scared and confused because you were gaslighting him. I was protecting him from making decisions he'd regret later when his mind cleared up. Around and around we went, each of us absolutely convinced of our own version of reality. Daniel genuinely seemed to believe that he had been helping Dad, not hurting him. In his mind he had been the devoted son trying to care for a declining father while his selfish sister interfered and ultimately destroyed the family. It was a masterpiece of self-deception, and it was terrifying to witness. How do you argue with someone who has rewritten history so completely in their own mind? How do you present evidence to someone who interprets every fact through the lens of their own victimhood? Dad had heard enough. His face was red with anger and exertion, and I was worried about his blood pressure. Daniel, he said firmly, you need to leave now. You've said what you came to say, you've returned the ring, and now you need to go before this gets any worse. I'm not the one making it worse, Dad. I came here to apologize and to try to make amends. She's the one who's turning it into a fight. You came here to rewrite history and make yourself the victim. You came here to blame Jessica for your own choices and actions, and I won't stand for it. Daniel's face hardened. The mask of repentance and humility finally slipped away, revealing the angry, entitled man underneath. Fine, he said. I tried to be reasonable. I tried to take the high road and extend an olive branch. But if you want to choose her over me, if you want to believe her lies over my truth, then that's your choice. He looked around the backyard at all the party guests who had witnessed this confrontation. His voice rose so everyone could hear him clearly. I want everyone here to know that I love my father, and I tried to take care of him the best way I knew how. And I want everyone to know that Jessica destroyed this family. because she couldn't stand not being the center of attention. She couldn't stand that Dad needed me more than he needed her. Then he looked directly at Dad with an expression of pure malice. "And I want you to know, Dad, that you're making a huge mistake. You're choosing the wrong child. You're trusting someone who sees you as a bank account instead of a father. And someday, when she shows her true colors, you're going to remember this moment and regret sending away the son who actually loved you." The cruelty of those words took my breath away. After everything that had happened, after all the evidence of his abuse and manipulation, Daniel was still trying to convince Dad that I was the real villain. He was still trying to plant seeds of doubt and suspicion that might grow into something larger later. But Dad had heard enough. His voice when he responded was cold and final. "Daniel, you are no longer welcome in my house or at my family gatherings. You are no longer welcome to contact me, or Jessica, or any member of this family. If you come here again, I will call the police and have you arrested for violating the restraining order." Daniel's face went pale. "Dad, you don't mean that. I mean every word of it.
You have burned every bridge, Daniel.
You have used up every second chance and every benefit of the doubt. You are no longer my son." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. Daniel stared at Dad for a long moment, and I saw the exact second when the last vestige of hope died in his eyes. His shoulders sagged, and suddenly he looked very small and very lost. "You'll regret this," he said quietly. "Both of you, you'll regret choosing each other over me." Then he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner without looking back. The party guests stood in shocked silence for several minutes after he left. Finally, Uncle Mike cleared his throat and suggested that maybe it was time to get the grill started. Gradually, conversations resumed, but the festive mood was gone. People stayed for a polite amount of time, ate their food, wished Dad a happy birthday, and left earlier than they probably would have otherwise. After the last guest had gone, and we'd cleaned up the yard, Dad and I sat on his back porch sharing a beer and watching the sun set behind his oak tree. "I'm sorry your party got ruined," I said. "It didn't get ruined. It got interrupted by someone who wasn't invited and isn't welcome. But the people who were supposed to be here got to celebrate with me, and that's what matters." He was quiet for a while, rolling Mom's wedding ring between his fingers. "Jessica, I want you to know that what Daniel said about you isn't true. You're not selfish or manipulative, and you don't see me as a bank account. You see me as your father, and you love me, and you've proven that over and over again." "Thank you, Dad. That means everything to me. But I also want you to know that what I said to Daniel was true. He is no longer welcome in this family. He had chances to make different choices, to get help, to take responsibility for his actions. Instead, he chose to double down on his delusions and his blame. I can't have that kind of toxicity in my life, and I won't expose you to it either." It was the moment I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. Dad was finally drawing a clear, permanent line between us and Daniel. He was choosing my safety and his own peace of mind over his paternal instinct to keep trying to save his son. "Are you sure, Dad? He is your son, and I know how much you love him. I will always love the little boy he used to be, but I can't love the man he's become, because that man is dangerous to the people I care about most. And Jessica, blood doesn't make someone family. Love and respect and mutual care make someone family." Daniel stopped being family the day he decided to hurt us instead of asking for help. Those words became the foundation of our new normal. Dad and I rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty and mutual respect, free from the toxic presence that had been poisoning our family for so long. We celebrated holidays together, took trips together, and simply enjoyed each other's company, without constantly looking over our shoulders or walking on eggshells. Daniel kept his word in his own twisted way. We did regret that day, but not for the reasons he thought. We regretted that it had taken so long for Dad to set clear boundaries. We regretted that Daniel had been allowed to cause so much damage before being stopped. We regretted that the little boy, who had once been full of promise and potential, had grown into a man capable of such cruelty. But we never regretted choosing each other. We never regretted choosing truth over lies, health over toxicity, love over manipulation. And we never regretted finally learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to refuse to enable their destruction of themselves and others. 6 months after the birthday party incident, I was organizing Dad's medication cabinet. when he called me into his study with an urgency I hadn't heard since the night we'd fled to my apartment. "Jessica, I need you to sit down. There's something we need to discuss." His desk was covered with legal documents, and his lawyer, Mr. Patterson, was sitting across from him with a grave expression. My stomach dropped. Had something happened with Daniel? Had he violated his probation again? "What's wrong?" I asked, settling into the chair beside Mr. Patterson. Dad took a deep breath. "I've been experiencing some health issues lately. Nothing dramatic, just some fatigue and occasional dizziness. Dr. Peterson ran some tests, and we got the results yesterday." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "What kind of results?" "I have early-stage Parkinson's disease." The words hit me like ice water. Parkinson's, the progressive neurological condition that would gradually rob him of his mobility, his independence, and eventually his ability to care for himself. The disease that would make him exactly as vulnerable as Daniel had always claimed he was. "How early is early stage?" I managed to ask. Dr. Peterson had been optimistic, Dad explained. With proper medication and physical therapy, he could maintain his current quality of life for several years. The progression would be slow, and there were treatments that could help manage the symptoms. But eventually he would need more care than he could provide for himself. "That's why Mr. Patterson is here," Dad continued. "We need to make sure all my legal affairs are properly arranged while I'm still completely competent to make these decisions." Mr. Patterson spread the documents across the desk. Updated power of attorney forms, healthcare directives, detailed instructions for Dad's care preferences, and a revision to his will that accounted for his changing medical needs. "The most important thing, Mr. Patterson explained, is establishing clear guidelines for your care as your condition progresses. Your father wants to remain in his home as long as possible, but he also wants to ensure you're not overwhelmed by caregiving responsibilities." We spent the next 2 hours going through every scenario, every contingency. Dad had researched Parkinson's thoroughly and understood exactly what he was facing. He wanted to maintain control over his decisions while he still could, and he wanted to protect me from the burden of making impossible choices later. "There's one more thing," Dad said as Mr. Patterson packed up his briefcase. "I want to set up a trust fund that will pay for professional caregivers when the time comes. I don't want you to have to choose between your career and taking care of me." "Dad, I would never put my career before taking care of you." "I know you wouldn't. And that's exactly why I'm making this decision for both of us. You've already sacrificed too much for this family. I won't let my illness take away the life you've built for yourself." After Mr. Patterson left, Dad and I sat in his kitchen, drinking coffee and processing this new reality. The diagnosis explained some things that had been worrying me lately. His handwriting had become smaller and more cramped. His walk had developed a slight shuffle that I'd attributed to normal aging. The occasional tremor in his left hand, that he'd dismissed as too much caffeine. "How long have you suspected?" I asked. "A few months, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. And I wanted to have a plan in place so you wouldn't worry about the practical aspects. Always thinking ahead, always trying to protect me from unnecessary stress." It was so typically Dad that I almost smiled despite the circumstances. "Are you scared?" I asked. He considered the question carefully. "I'm scared of becoming a burden.
I'm scared of losing my independence, but I'm not scared of the disease itself. At my age, something was going to get me eventually. At least this is something we can plan for." Over the following weeks, we settled into a new routine that accommodated Dad's diagnosis. He started physical therapy twice a week and began taking medication that helped control his symptoms. I researched everything I could about Parkinson's, learning about nutrition, exercise, and environmental modifications that might slow the progression. The strange thing was that Dad seemed more at peace than he'd been in years. The uncertainty was gone. He knew what he was facing, and he had a plan for dealing with it. There was something liberating about having a concrete enemy to fight, instead of the vague anxiety about aging and mortality that had been haunting him since Mom's death. But the diagnosis also brought Daniel back into our lives in a way we hadn't expected. 3 weeks after Dad's diagnosis, I was leaving the grocery store when I spotted a familiar figure sitting in a car across the parking lot. Daniel watching me load bags into my trunk. When he realized I'd seen him, he got out of his car and walked over. "Jessica," he said, and his voice was different somehow. Calmer, less hostile than it had been at the birthday party. "What do you want, Daniel?"
You're not supposed to contact me or Dad. I heard about Dad's diagnosis. Of course he had. Despite our efforts to keep the information within a small circle, word had inevitably spread through the extended family network. I wondered who had told him, and whether they'd done it intentionally or accidentally. What about it? I want to help. The simple statement caught me off guard. After everything that had happened, after the criminal charges and the restraining order and the permanent banishment from Dad's life, Daniel wanted to help. Help with what, exactly? Taking care of him. I know about Parkinson's, Jessica. I know what's coming. He's going to need constant care eventually, and you can't do it all by yourself. We have a plan in place. Professional caregivers, medical support, all of it arranged and paid for. We don't need your help. Daniel stepped closer, and I instinctively took a step back. But his body language wasn't threatening. If anything, he looked defeated. I know you don't need my help. I know you've probably got everything perfectly organized and under control, just like always. But he's still my father, and I still love him, and I want to be part of his life while there's still time. There was something in his tone that I hadn't heard before. Genuine humility, maybe, or authentic remorse. It wasn't the manipulative pseudo-apology he'd attempted at the birthday party. It sounded like someone who had finally accepted responsibility for their actions. Daniel, even if I wanted to help you reconcile with Dad, which I don't, it's not my decision to make. He made it very clear that he doesn't want you in his life. Because of what I did to him. Because I hurt him when I should have been protecting him. Yes, but that was before we knew about the Parkinson's. That was before we understood that some of his confusion and disorientation might have been early symptoms of his disease, not just the effects of aging. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Are you seriously trying to blame Dad's medical condition for your abuse? No, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I did was wrong regardless of why Dad was confused. I should never have given him unprescribed medications, and I should never have isolated him from his support system. I'm not trying to excuse that. He paused, gathering his thoughts. But Jessica, what if some of his disorientation was caused by the early stages of Parkinson's? What if I was trying to help him manage symptoms that neither of us understood? What if my methods were completely wrong, but my intentions were actually right? It was a seductive argument, and I could see why Daniel found it appealing. It allowed him to maintain that he had been trying to help Dad while acknowledging that his methods had been harmful. It preserved his self-image as a loving son, while admitting to specific mistakes and judgment, but it was also bullshit. Daniel, even if that were true, it doesn't change anything. You made the choice to handle Dad's problems in secret instead of seeking professional help. You made the choice to cut him off from family and medical support instead of building a team around him. You made the choice to prioritize your own control over his well-being. You're right, I made terrible choices, and I hurt him badly. But people can change, Jessica. People can learn from their mistakes and become better. Some people can, but you've had multiple chances to show that you've changed, and every time you've chosen to blame everyone else for your problems. That was before. That was when I was still angry and defensive and trying to protect my ego. This is different. I wanted to believe him. Despite everything he had done, despite all the pain he had caused, some part of me still remembered the little boy who had been my playmate and partner in countless childhood adventures. Some part of me wanted to believe that the Daniel I had grown up with was still in there somewhere, buried under layers of resentment and poor choices. But I also remembered how convincing he could be when he wanted something. How skillfully he could craft arguments that sounded reasonable and compassionate while serving his own interests. How easily he could make others doubt their own perceptions and memories. What exactly are you asking for? I said. A chance to see him, not to live with him or take care of him, just to visit occasionally. To be part of his life while he's still himself. The restraining order prevents that. Restraining orders can be modified or lifted if both parties agree. And if Dad's medical situation has changed, the court might be willing to reconsider the terms. He'd clearly researched this thoroughly. I wondered how long he'd been planning this approach, waiting for the right opportunity to present himself as the reformed prodigal son. Daniel, even if I thought this was a good idea, which I don't, Dad would never agree to it. You hurt him too deeply. Maybe, or maybe he'd be willing to consider it if you talked to him. If you explain that I've changed, that I understand what I did wrong, that I want to make amends. And there it was. The real ask. He didn't just want my permission or my forgiveness. He wanted me to be his advocate with Dad. He wanted me to convince our father to give him another chance. I'm not going to do that. Why not? What are you afraid of? I'm afraid you'll hurt him again. I'm afraid you'll take advantage of his illness to manipulate him. I'm afraid you'll undo all the progress he's made in healing from what you did to him. Or maybe you're afraid that if Dad forgives me, you'll lose your position as the perfect daughter. Maybe you're afraid that if I'm back in the picture, you won't be the only one he depends on. There it was, the accusation I'd been waiting for. Even in his supposedly reformed state, Daniel couldn't resist implying that my motives were selfish. And there's the real Daniel, I said, still convinced that everyone else's actions are motivated by jealousy and competition. Still unable to accept that maybe people oppose you because your behavior is genuinely harmful. I'm sorry, that was unfair. I'm still working on controlling my defensive reactions, but the damage was done. The mask had slipped for just a moment, revealing the same entitled paranoid thinking that had driven all of his previous actions. He might have learned to package his manipulation in more sophisticated language, but the fundamental mindset hadn't changed. This conversation is over, I said, moving toward my car. Jessica, wait, please. I know I screwed that up, but I'm trying to be better. Can't you see that I'm trying? Trying isn't enough, Daniel. Dad doesn't owe you forgiveness just because you're trying. I don't owe you advocacy just because you've learned some therapy buzzwords. You had years to be better, and you chose to be worse every single time. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing in the parking lot. But his words stayed with me for the rest of the day, picking at my brain like a persistent itch. What if he really had changed? What if his request was genuine? What if Dad would want the chance to reconcile with his son before his illness progressed too far? That evening, I found myself telling Dad about the encounter. Not because I thought he should see Daniel, but because I felt like he deserved to know that Daniel was aware of his diagnosis and wanted back into his life. Dad listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. What do you think I should do? He finally asked. I think you should do whatever feels right for you, without worrying about my feelings or Daniel's feelings or anyone else's opinion. That's a very diplomatic answer. It's an honest answer. This is your life, your health, your decision. If you want to see Daniel, I'll support that choice. If you don't want to see him, I'll support that choice too. Dad smiled. You know, there was a time when I would have felt obligated to give Daniel another chance just because he's my son. When I would have convinced myself that forgiveness was always the right choice, regardless of the circumstances. And now I understand that forgiveness is something you give when someone has earned it through changed behavior over time. Not something you give because someone asks for it nicely, or because you're afraid of being seen as unforgiving. He paused, staring out the window at his garden. Daniel had multiple chances to earn forgiveness. He could have accepted responsibility for his actions from the beginning. He could have sought help for whatever was driving his behavior. He could have worked to make amends instead of working to avoid consequences. But he didn't. No, he didn't. And now he wants me to believe he's changed based on one conversation in a parking lot. He wants me to risk my peace of mind and your safety based on his promises. Dad turned to look at me directly. Jessica, I've lived with Parkinson's for 6 months now. I've had time to think about mortality and legacy, and what really matters. And what I've learned is that I don't have energy to waste on people who drain my emotional resources. I need to focus that energy on the people who genuinely care about my well-being. So you're not interested in seeing Daniel. I'm interested in spending whatever time I have left with people who love me without conditions and support me without expecting anything in return. Daniel has never been that person, and I don't believe he's become that person now. It was the answer I'd hoped for, but it also made me sad. Not because I wanted Dad to reconcile with Daniel, but because I realized how much energy and heartache could have been avoided if Dad had learned to set these boundaries years earlier. 2 months later, we heard through the family grapevine that Daniel had moved across the country. No forwarding address, no goodbye messages, just gone. Some relatives seemed to think this was tragic, a talented young man giving up on his family and his future. Others seemed relieved that the drama was finally over. Dad's reaction was philosophical. Some people spend their whole lives running away from their problems, he said. Maybe this time Daniel will run far enough that he's forced to stop and deal with himself. As Dad's condition gradually progressed over the following year, I was grateful every day that we didn't have to navigate Daniel's presence along with everything else. Managing Parkinson's was challenging enough without the added stress of wondering whether someone in our support system had ulterior motives. The professional caregivers Dad had hired were competent and compassionate. His medical team was attentive and responsive. Our extended family, the ones who had always been genuinely supportive, rallied around us with meals and visits and practical help. It was the kind of community support system that Daniel had always been too self-centered to appreciate or cultivate. The kind of network that develops when you spend years investing in relationships without keeping score, when you treat people with respect and kindness, because it's the right thing to do, not because you expect something in return. Dad lived for 3 more years after his diagnosis, maintaining his independence and dignity almost until the end. When he passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by people who loved him, I felt sadness but also profound gratitude. Gratitude that he had been spared the confusion and fear that Daniel's presence would have added to his final years. Gratitude that we had learned to prioritize genuine love over obligatory family loyalty. The funeral was well attended by friends and relatives who had genuine affection for Dad. Daniel didn't come. I'm not sure if he even knew that Dad had died, since none of us had his contact information. Some people might consider that tragic, a son missing his father's funeral, but I considered it a natural consequence of his choices. He had prioritized his own comfort and convenience over family relationships for so long that when the most important family moment arrived, there was no relationship left to honor. After the funeral, as I was cleaning out Dad's house, I found a letter he had written to Daniel but never sent. It was dated just a few months after his Parkinson's diagnosis, around the time of our conversation about whether to give Daniel another chance. In the letter, Dad had written about his disappointment in the man Daniel had become, but also about his enduring love for the child Daniel had once been. He had written about forgiveness being a gift that must be earned, not demanded. He had written about the difference between unconditional love and unconditional tolerance of harmful behavior. The final paragraph stayed with me. Son, I will always hope that you find peace and happiness in your life. But I have learned that I cannot sacrifice my own peace and the well-being of people I love in order to enable your refusal to take responsibility for your actions. Love sometimes means saying no. Love sometimes means walking away. Love sometimes means choosing the family you build over the family you were born into. I kept the letter for a while, thinking I might try to find Daniel and give it to him. But eventually, I realized that would just be another way of trying to fix something that couldn't be fixed. Daniel knew how to find us if he ever genuinely wanted to make amends. The fact that he had chosen distance over accountability told me everything I needed to know about his priorities. Today, 5 years later, I have a peaceful life filled with people who choose to be in it, not people who feel entitled to be in it. I have friends who support me through difficult times without keeping score. I have professional colleagues who respect my competence without feeling threatened by it. I have a romantic relationship with someone who appreciates my independence without trying to control it. Most importantly, I have learned the difference between being loving and being a pushover. I have learned that setting boundaries doesn't make you selfish, and that protecting yourself from toxic people doesn't make you unforgiving. I have learned that family is defined by love and respect and mutual care, not by blood or obligation or guilt. The title of this story suggests that Dad changed his will the night Daniel said I wasn't family. But that's not quite accurate. Dad didn't change his will because he was angry or hurt or trying to punish Daniel. He changed his will because he finally understood that being someone's parent doesn't mean accepting abuse from them. He changed his will because he learned to distinguish between the son he had raised and the man that son had chosen to become. The real change wasn't in the legal documents. The real change was in Dad's understanding of what family means and what love requires. Sometimes love requires sacrifice and forgiveness and second chances. But sometimes love requires boundaries and consequences, and the courage to walk away from people who are determined to hurt you. Daniel was wrong when he said I wasn't family, but he was also wrong about what family means. Family isn't about blood or obligation or guilt. Family is about choosing each other,
day after day, through good times and bad times, with honesty and respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. By that definition, Dad and I were always family, and by that definition, Daniel chose not to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.